In the late 1880s, the daily life of Adventists in the United States unfolded at a pace similar to that of thousands of other Protestant communities, scattered throughout the country's interior. Mornings began early, marked by the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, the rekindling of fires in wood-burning stoves, and the silent reading of local newspapers when available. In medium and small towns, many of them expanding due to railroads and mechanized agriculture, Adventist families occupied simple homes, often close to their workplaces, which reduced commuting and reinforced community life. The Sabbath, set aside as a day of rest, organized the week in a distinct way, influencing practical decisions about commerce, schedules, and social relations. Work was a central element of this routine. Men worked as typesetters, farmers, teachers, artisans, editors, or employees of small institutions linked to the denomination, while women combined household chores with activities such as sewing, food preparation, elementary education, and, in some cases, paid work in schools or offices. Children participated early in domestic responsibilities and, when possible, attended local schools or institutions maintained by the Adventist community itself. Education was seen as a tool for social advancement and moral preservation, and books occupied a visible place in homes, alongside Bibles, almanacs, and practical manuals. In places like Battle Creek, considered an administrative and publishing center of Adventism at the time, daily life combined the dynamics of a growing industrial city with the constant presence of printing presses, offices, and church-related residences. The streets mixed horse-drawn carts, pedestrians, and the first signs of more structured urban transportation. Social life revolved around regular gatherings, shared meals, and extended conversations after services, which were simple, without excessive ornamentation, and focused on reading, collective singing, and lengthy biblical expositions, typical of the period. Diet reflected both economic conditions and specific cultural choices. Many Adventists adopted simple diets, reducing meat consumption and prioritizing grains, fruits, vegetables, and homemade preparations. This practice was neither uniform nor mandatory, but was part of an ongoing internal debate, influenced by popular health ideas of the 19th century. Meals were quiet moments or times of moderate conversation, almost always shared with family, at regular times, and with little room for excess. Clothing followed common Victorian patterns, with dark, durable garments adapted for daily work. There was no Adventist fashion as such, but sobriety was valued, both for economic reasons and for a sense of cultural distinction. Clothes were often homemade or tailored to last for years, being mended and reused as needed. Attention to appearance was linked to order and public respectability, important factors for minority religious groups within a pluralistic society. Relations with non-Adventist neighbors were generally cordial, although marked by mutual curiosity. The observance of the Sabbath set these families apart, requiring constant explanations to employers, business partners, and local authorities. In some contexts, this generated subtle tensions, resolved through informal agreements or by seeking more flexible occupations. In other cases, the difference was simply another trait in communities already accustomed to religious diversity. Free time was limited, but not non-existent. Walks, reading aloud, home music, and family visits were part of the routine. Simple instruments, such as harmoniums and violins, were used in social gatherings, always with a repertoire considered appropriate to the religious environment. These activities reinforced bonds and created a sense of continuity amidst the country's rapid economic and technological transformations. In 1888, Adventists were attentive to the changes around them, aware that they were part of a young denomination, still in formation, and of a nation that was advancing rapidly in industrial and urban development. Daily life, with its repetitive tasks and practical choices, prepared the ground for broader internal debates that would soon gain national prominence, as meetings and assemblies began to concentrate latent expectations and tensions. As the year 1888 progressed, the daily routine of Adventists in the United States maintained its seemingly stable appearance. But beneath this surface lay an atmosphere of quiet attentiveness. Weeks continued to be organized around regular work and weekly rest, but letters, periodicals, and commentaries circulated, pointing to ongoing discussions within the denomination. Many members followed these movements indirectly, through religious newspapers read at night by lamplight or in discreet conversations after services, without this immediately altering the rhythm of their daily tasks. Publications played a central role in daily life. Adventist printing presses operated at a steady pace, printing magazines, pamphlets, and books that were distributed by mail or sold by colporteurs who traveled through rural areas and small towns. In Adventist homes, it was common to find organized stacks of periodicals, read and reread, shared with neighbors and used as a basis for personal study. The act of reading was a frequent domestic practice, often carried out in collective silence, reflecting a habit of concentration that contrasted with the noisy industrial environment that was expanding in the country. Travel was slow and planned. Longer journeys required days of preparation and involved steam trains, simple lodgings, and irregular meals. When church representatives were away for administrative meetings or general assemblies, their families remained at home, maintaining their usual routine, following the news with moderate expectation. The physical distance between communities reinforced local autonomy, allowing each group to resolve its practical issues with relative independence. In many areas of the Midwest, Adventists were integrated into the regional agricultural economy. The harvest calendar directly influenced community life, determining periods of greater physical exertion and others of relative rest. The Sabbath, in this context, was observed with special care, requiring prior planning to avoid conflicts between work and religious conviction. This practical discipline shaped habits of anticipation and organization that were reflected in other areas of daily life. Women played a particularly visible role in maintaining this stability. Beyond domestic responsibilities, many worked as teachers, lay nurses, or collaborators in small health and education institutions. Caring for the sick, both at home and in makeshift settings, was part of common experience, especially at a time when local epidemics and workplace accidents were frequent. This care was provided practically, based on knowledge transmitted orally and on popular manuals of the time. The presence of well-known figures within the denomination did not significantly alter the daily lives of ordinary families. Ellen G. White, when she was in the United States during this period, was seen as a writer and active observer of events, whose texts circulated widely, but whose physical presence was rare for most members. Her letters and articles were read as records of the time, offering commentary and descriptions that added to other voices in the internal debate without directly interfering in the daily tasks of those who tilled the land, cared for children, or operated printing presses. Local meetings remained simple and regular. Wooden benches, modest lighting, and long periods of oral presentation characterized these gatherings. There was no rush, and silence was considered a natural part of the collective experience. After the services, conversations extended to practical topics such as harvests, health, children's education, and news from distant relatives. More complex doctrinal issues were discussed cautiously, often left to regional leaders or printed articles. In 1888, the national scenario also influenced this daily life. The country was experiencing labor tensions, accelerated urban growth, and intense political debates. Adventists, for the most part, observed these events from a distance, primarily concerned with the stability of their communities and the preservation of an orderly way of life. Political neutrality was common, not out of disinterest, but as a practical choice to avoid unnecessary conflicts in environments where they were already perceived as a distinct group. As the General Assembly of that year, held in Minneapolis, approached, daily life remained seemingly unchanged. However, the circulation of ideas, the careful reading of recent texts, and the restrained expectation indicated that something was forming within the denomination. Routines continued, but now served as a backdrop to a moment that, although still distant from the daily lives of most, was beginning to cast its shadows on the immediate future of the community. While news of the General Assembly circulated slowly, the daily life of Adventists in 1888 remained marked by repetition and predictability. In rural areas, the day began before dawn, with tasks that demanded constant physical effort and attention to weather conditions. Caring for animals, maintaining fences, and preparing the soil occupied a large part of the working hours. This rhythm shaped the body and mind, creating a direct relationship between work, survival, and time. The nights were silent, interrupted only by the wind, the creaking of wooden houses, and readings done in a low voice. In the cities, daily life presented other demands. The sound of machines, printing presses, and the increasing traffic of horse-drawn carts was part of the environment. Adventists who worked in printing shops or offices kept regular hours, with brief breaks for simple meals brought from home. The urban space broadened contact with diverse ideas, but also reinforced the need for personal discipline to maintain religious practices amidst an increasingly accelerated industrial routine. Cow porters were a constant presence in this scene. Men and women traveled along rough roads, staying in the homes of acquaintances or in small boarding houses, offering books and religious periodicals. This activity required physical stamina, patience, and social skills. The return of these travelers to local communities brought reports from distant regions, descriptions of different customs, and news about the growth or difficulties of other Adventist groups. These reports were listened to with moderate interest, integrated into daily life without substantially altering its structure. Communication between communities depended almost exclusively on the mail. Letters took weeks to arrive and were carefully written, making the most of every sheet of paper. Important news was copied by hand and read aloud at local meetings. This slow pace encouraged reflection and reduced immediate reactions. Internal disagreements, when they arose, were absorbed gradually, discussed in small groups, and often resolved without formal record. Education remained a practical concern. In some localities, schools run by Adventists operated in makeshift classrooms. With few resources and teachers who performed multiple functions, the teaching was basic, focused on reading, writing, arithmetic, and moral principles considered appropriate to the context of the time. Children learned early on to balance study and work, and this combination was seen as natural preparation for adult life. Healthcare was treated pragmatically. Without regular access to doctors, many families resorted to home remedies, rest, and dietary changes. Small healthcare institutions, when they existed, operated with limited resources based on common 19th-century practices. Illness and accidents were part of everyday experience, reinforcing the awareness of the fragility of life and the importance of community cooperation. Family relationships were structured by clear hierarchies and defined expectations. Fathers exercised firm authority, mothers organized domestic life, and children learned through observation and repetition. Important decisions were made collectively, usually after lengthy discussions and consideration of the practical consequences. The home functioned as a central space for education, work, and rest, with little separation between these spheres. As more detailed accounts of the Minneapolis Assembly began to circulate, there were no immediate changes in daily behavior. Most members had not directly participated in the discussions and remained focused on local tasks. Still, certain themes emerged more frequently in private conversations and individual readings. It was not open agitation, but a gradual adjustment of attention, almost imperceptible in the normal flow of days. The year 1888 progressed without visible disruptions to the routine. Adventism remained a discrete presence in the American religious landscape, sustained by simple habits, constant work, and a slow but persistent communication network. Daily life, with its regularity and limitations, offered the setting in which deeper changes began to take shape, still restricted to the realm of ideas and interpretations that would soon find clearer expression. At the close of 1888, the daily life of Adventists in the United States maintained its restrained and functional appearance, even after the wider circulation of the ideas discussed that year. For most families, the immediate impact was almost imperceptible. Mornings continued to begin early, chores were repeated regularly, and the Sabbath continued to be prepared for with careful anticipation. The agricultural calendar, professional commitments, and domestic responsibilities remained the main references of the lived time, more concrete than any distant theological debate. In small communities, the local church remained a stable meeting point. The building, when it existed, was simple, built with local resources and maintained by the members themselves. In many places, services still took place in private homes or borrowed schools. These spaces were not perceived as temporary, but as natural extensions of community life. The environment fostered prolonged gatherings, where silence, reading, and collective singing were effortlessly integrated into the weekly routine. Saturday continued to function as the organizing axis of the week. Preparation included cleaning the house, organizing food, and adjusting work schedules to avoid commercial activities on that day. This practice required constant discipline, especially in urban contexts where the industrial rhythm never stopped. Even so, most Adventists sought to maintain this separation pragmatically, negotiating schedules and accepting economic limitations as part of the cost of community belonging. Reading remained one of the main ways of connecting with the wider world. Secular newspapers carried news about strikes, elections, and technological advances, while religious publications continued to fuel internal reflection. These texts were read slowly, often discussed days or weeks after publication. The temporal distance between the event and its assimilation was part of the common experience, reducing immediate reactions and favoring gradual interpretations. Younger generations grew up within this stable environment, learning from an early age to value constancy and self-control. For many Adventist teenagers in 1888, adult life seemed a direct continuation of childhood, with few expected disruptions. The future was envisioned in terms of honest work, family formation, and remaining within the same community network. Social mobility existed, but it was limited by economic conditions and geography. The internal tensions discussed among leaders did not translate into visible conflicts in daily life. Differences in interpretation rarely affected practical coexistence. What was perceived was a discrete increase in the attention given to certain themes in personal readings and private conversations. Even so, these reflections remained subordinate to the immediate demands of daily life, such as harvests, illnesses, births, and seasonal changes. Contact with the wider society remained marked by a reserved posture. Adventists did not seek complete isolation, but maintained a certain cultural distance, especially in relation to popular entertainment and practices considered excessive. This distinction was not explicitly stated. It manifested itself in the choice of simple habits and a preference for predictable environments. To many neighbors, Adventists were known more for their regularity and reliability than for their specific beliefs. The end of the 1880s also brought signs of structural transformation in the country. The expansion of railroads, the growth of cities, and the increase in industrial production were beginning to alter patterns of work and coexistence. Within Adventist communities, these changes were observed with caution. There was an awareness that the way of life based on small communities and controllable rhythms would face increasing challenges in the following years. Even so, in 1888, the prevailing feeling was one of continuity. Daily life offered enough stability to absorb debates and adjustments without immediate disruptions. Adventism, as a religious movement, remained connected to the concrete experiences of its members, shaped more by what happened in kitchens, fields, and local meeting rooms than by large national gatherings. This balance between routine and reflection characterized the moment. The ideas discussed that year were slowly beginning to integrate into common experience, without immediately altering the way people woke up, worked, ate, and rested. History advanced discreetly, incorporated into daily life almost unnoticed, preparing the stage for transformations that would become more visible only with the passage of time. Observing the daily life of Adventists in the United States in 1888. What stands out is not an isolated event or a visible rupture, but the persistence of a way of life shaped by regularity, constant work, and silent adaptation to the circumstances of the time. The Adventist experience of that period was in many respects intertwined with that of other Protestant groups in the American interior, sharing the same material challenges, the same technological limitations, and the same social horizon, marked by the country's industrial and agricultural expansion. Daily life was the primary space where identity and belonging were constructed. It wasn't the large national gatherings or the most complex theological debates that defined the lives of most, but the practical decisions made within simple homes, fields cultivated with effort, and small meeting rooms maintained by the community itself. The observance of the Sabbath, the organization of work, the emphasis on reading, and the valuing of education functioned as structuring elements of a routine that sought coherence and predictability in a rapidly changing world. This way of life was not without tensions. Religious differences required constant negotiations with employers, neighbors, and local authorities. Limited resources imposed difficult choices, especially regarding health, education, and social mobility. Even so, these tensions were rarely expressed openly or through conflict. They were absorbed into the slow pace of communication through letters, individual reflection, and private conversations among community members. The year 1888, often remembered for specific institutional events, was experienced by most Adventists as just another year of work, discipline, and continuity. The ideas discussed during that period did not immediately alter the way people woke up before dawn, prepared their meals, cared for their children, or ended the day by the dim light of a lamp. History, in this context, advanced discreetly, integrated into common experience without clear announcements of change. This contrast between later institutional memory and real everyday experience reveals an essential aspect of late 19th-century Adventism. The movement was sustained, less by extraordinary moments and more by repeated habits, practical decisions, and a community network capable of offering stability amidst uncertainty. Faith, lived in daily life, was inseparable from the material and social conditions in which these families were embedded. By the end of the decade, signs of national transformation were becoming more evident, and Adventists, like other Americans, would be progressively affected by new forms of work, transportation, and social organization. In 1888, however, continuity prevailed. Life went on as normal, and it is precisely in this normality that we find the key to understanding how Adventism consolidated itself. Not through abrupt ruptures, but through the slow construction of a way of life capable of traversing time, almost unnoticed.